Hi, everybody, and welcome to Three Questions, where I ask a guest to choose 3 out of 5 questions, and we talk about them and talk about stuff. And I am really honored to be talking with Tyler Rablin today. Tyler Rablin is a teacher, a coach, an author, a consultant who specializes in assessment and technology, which are two topics that I have a uneasy relationship with. But one of the reasons why I love Tyler's work is that every time I hear him talk about assessment or technology, it is deeply rooted in kid-centered, authentic pedagogies that feel real and beautiful and full of meaning. And so I knew that when I was doing this series, one of the things I've been doing is reaching out to people that I don't know yet or haven't met yet in person, who I just know their work from afar. And Tyler fits that description because this is actually our first meeting here recorded, which should be hilarious and fun and good. So thank you and welcome, Tyler. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me on here. I'm just excited to get to meet you, and it'll be fun to get to talk.
Absolutely. All right. So the first question that you chose is question number 1, which is, what is your origin story as an educator? And how would you characterize your current work? But we can start with the
Yeah,
origin story.
I really like the origin story piece. I just think I love superhero stuff, so it feels like a villain origin story, but it's hopefully not that. So I started my teaching career in 2012, and so I always grew up around cities, and that's just what I was used to. And then 2012, I graduated, and everyone was like, "There's going to be teaching jobs everywhere," and there somehow wasn't teaching jobs anywhere. I was in Portland at the time,
Yeah.
and so I moved out to rural Eastern Oregon, Milton Freewater, kind of middle of nowhere, and started teaching there. And I think the second part of the question, how do I characterize my current work? I mean, a lot of my work focuses around assessment. And so I often have thought back to where did that start? Because I obviously as a student, you typically don't think about it at all. You're just like, how do I get the points? That's all you really
I
focus
wonder
on.
what system my teacher is using to assess my progress. Yeah, not a lot of kids think that.
But I think it's kind of my interest in assessment started there, and it started with a student who at the time I taught juniors, and so she was in my junior English class, and we talked books all the time. She was an incredible writer. She would give me just stories she was writing all the time, and I loved reading them. And at the end of the year, she failed my class abysmally, really, really low failing grade, because she wasn't doing the things that I was telling her to do. And I realized in that moment, it didn't have anything to do with learning. There was this huge disconnect, and I didn't understand how to fix it or what I could do. And so I think sort of that failure, and not really that failure, that student that I recognized, I didn't do something right by that kid.
Mm-hmm.
That was really the origin of I got to figure out a way to do this better for kids. And so that's why now, my goal with my assessment system, or any teacher I work with now, is, there's an element of school that just exists where there are certain tasks that need to be done. And it's hard to get around that. But how do we create flexibility in that for the kids that maybe don't fit that system perfectly, so that they can still see their brilliance reflected somehow in that grade book, even if it's not the exact way we expected that to happen?
I love that. I love that. I'm going to follow up because I still want to poke into your origin story a little bit. But the whole thing of assessment is we may have different systems and different ways of doing it, but it's how do I attempt to put a point value on the things that I actually value, right? The things that I actually care about that kids are doing, as opposed to all compliance. It's cool. So origin story, I get there wasn't a job in Portland. I have a friend who teaches in Portland, and I can concur that teaching jobs are hard to find in Portland. It's all the Portland hippies are trying to get jobs teaching. Well, I don't know what to do. But why teaching? What is it? What was the thing, right? Because for me, the origin story in superheroes is about the Joker falling in the vat of acid, right? If it's a villain origin story. So what's your vat of acid?
Okay, this is gonna sound like blasphemy because I'm an English teacher, but I feel like I had the typical, not to stereotype, but
Mhm.
gender wise, typical male story of my experience with reading, where like as a kid, I loved to read. Like the Redwall series, still remember
Yeah.
like that. I loved reading as a kid. And then I feel like as I grew up, I started playing sports, and reading sort of like fell off for me, whether it was expectations of people, saying like, no, that's not what you do. You go do these things. And I lost this thing that I love. And it wasn't until like freshman and sophomore year of high school, I was the kid that read Spark Notes and didn't, and like faked my book report, no, and stuff like that. And then junior year, I will never be able to tell anyone why this is the book that got me, but my English teacher recommended that I read The Red Pony by John Steinbeck, and
I mean,
I've read it again since. I don't actually really love it anymore, but something in that book I just felt like
yeah.
as I was reading, you developed a connection with what's going on, and these like made up things suddenly became real and moved me. And I had that experience junior year, and then my senior year, I had an English teacher that just really kind of pushed me to, I mean, obviously it's an English class, like we were working on reading and writing, but use that as a vehicle for me to really critically examine like how has society tried to shape you, like are you the person you want to be. And it was those conversations that were so powerful for me. And so I think I didn't really even then know that I want to be a teacher, but as I started studying literature in college, and I realized
Mhm.
like I want to be able to give other kids that experience. It's not always going to happen, but like books changed how I interact with the world. And I just wanted to pay that forward in some way, shape, or form. And so that's really how I ended up going into teaching.
I love that. I feel the same way. I feel humbled sometimes because a lot of the conversations I've had with people with origin stories, they've been like, I loved kids. And I'm always a little like, yeah, yeah. I do now. I love kids. Like, I love them now. You know what I mean? But like when I started
uh,
teaching, I remember this one woman was like, well, do you like kids? And I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, yeah. And she's like, well, you can't be a teacher if you don't love kids. And I got so scared. I'm like, oh no, I think I do. But what I loved was, that sounds so dorky, but I loved ideas. Like I loved
mhm.
discourse. I love the way that English classrooms, for me, also in high school, I also didn't read any of the books ever until senior year when I had a teacher who knew how to talk to kids. Like same, very similar story. And I loved the space of the English classroom and the thing that the things that people talked about in there. It sounds
Mhm.
similar, right? That yes, I like kids. Yes, I care about the youth. But that sort of, it was almost like an arranged marriage that way. Like that love came later
Yeah.
through our
You get in there
relationship.
and then you're just like, wait, these kids are awesome. How could I not enjoy being around them?
They're amazing. I know, and I taught middle school, so I don't know what is wrong with me, but I love them. I
Awesome.
love that. Okay, so second question was number 2. If you had 3 wishes to bestow on the American education system, what would your wishes be?
I like I intentionally chose this because I only know one and I'll figure out the other two as we
Yeah.
go. I feel like that's where I'll really get to my values is when I have to think on the spot. But the first one that I always think of is one of my biggest wishes, and this applies mostly to secondary schools. I wish I could take away the ability to average points over time to determine a final grade. I think so much of our assessment system is rooted in that practice. And it makes it hard to see that there could be another way of doing it. And I love this is a conversation I have with friends all the time of like, all right, if we took that away, like what would you do? Because I think that question of what would you do, it's terrifying at a little
Yep.
bit, but it's also super freeing of just um you can kind of dream about like, well, what does matter to me? Or I know earlier you were saying that like it's sort of grades are kind of communication, and so you can think like, well, what do I really want to communicate to my students? What do I want to show them that I value, that is valuable in their learning? So I think that would be one.
Well, hold on before you move on. I'm a
Yes,
lingerer, so you have to put up with that.
I love it.
Oh, I know that most educators understand what the problems with averaging are, right? But I think there's also lots of people who it's like it's air we breathe, right? They haven't thought about it, or they haven't read your work or Alfie's work, or people who've like really unpacked this idea of how damaging averaging can be. Can you do a quick kind of elevator pitch about why averaging is so problematic with grading?
Um, a couple reasons. I mean, it takes away the flexibility to actually value failure and mistakes in the learning process. Because if we're holding everyone accountable for everything, as we can say failure is important, it's valuable, it's positive, but then it goes in the grade book and it pulls their grade down. But the big one for me is I have a sort of a scenario that I use a lot of times when I talk about it, and it's got a grade book set up. And let's say a student has 5 attempts at demonstrating proficiency on a standard, and you have one
Mhm,
student that starts at a 4 and shows no growth. They stay at a
mhm,
4 the whole time. And then you have a student that starts maybe down at a level 1 in terms of their
mhm,
proficiency. Maybe their
mhm.
next attempt, they're still at a 1. And then they show just this rapid growth, and they go
Yeah,
from a 1 up to a 5's the highest. They, in the next 3 attempts, they progress up to a 5, and they've really demonstrated mastery. And as soon as we average that, what happens is the student that started the highest but showed no growth ends up with, an 80% if it's 4 out of 5 the whole time. And your other student who started really, really low, they're ending with, I won't do the math that quickly in my head, but an F or a D or something low. And it's again that grading is communication. It's so hard for me because you think about what the student who started really low in their proficiency but grew a ton, they're getting the message that it doesn't matter where you ended up.
mhm,
It matters more where you started. And I
yeah,
know that sounds grandiose, and there's all sorts of extrapolations we can pull out of that, but I think there's just a very big reality to that of the purpose of our education system, or the goal that I have as an educator is to make sure that every student, no matter where they're at, can go as far as they can. And if we average, we're inherently holding students back from that reality.
yep. I remember I was the type of student in school that I didn't have to work very hard, and school came easily to me, and I could not read the books, and I could do Spark Notes, and I could get I could get A plus, right? Because I was already good at this stuff. And I had a close friend who just school never came very easily to, right? And so she was brilliant, but just didn't come to her. And I remember there was one marking period where she was like, I'm gonna work hard. I'm gonna do this. You know what I mean? She was like, I'm gonna, I'm gonna be a student, right? And all the friends were like, yeah, you are. And we like supported her and helped her out. We had homework time and all this stuff. And at the end of the marking period, because she's not that great at it, right? It took her a long time to kind of get it. To your point, she got like a D plus or something. And she was
Mhm.
like, well, why would I even work as hard as I've worked when you can get a D plus by doing very little, right? I don't have to do anything and I can get a D plus or a C minus or
Mhm.
something like that, right?
Mhm.
So it's for real. I mean, you say it's grandiose, but these are huge things we're communicating when we say that to kids, that your work doesn't actually matter.
Yeah, and
Right.
to your point, thinking about the story you were just telling, like when you have a student that goes through that and then maybe puts in effort again the next year, but the same thing happens, that's where I taught at the high school level, and everyone's like, oh, this student just won't even try, and almost blaming the student. And it's like they have tried previously, but things have been reinforced over and over to the point where they just believe it's not worth it to try. I can't do it, and even if I get it, it's not going to be valued. And so I think that to me is why it's averaging is one of the things we have to question most in our grading practices.
I love that. I love that. I could talk a lot more about that, but we're gonna move on. Okay, wish number two.
Okay,
Did you have
wish
time to think
number
about it? Yeah,
two.
I mean, I can keep talking if you want. If you need more time, I can just tell you the story. It's
Just
totally
keep
fine.
give us some good stories here. Let's see, wish number two. Oh, okay, this has been on my mind a lot. I'm an instructional coach right now, and I work with teachers all the time. I mean, I I wish I could give more time. Like I wish somehow I could wave a wand and every teacher's plan time would double.
Yep.
At least we need more
At
than
least.
that. I mean, yeah, I think the U.S. is like one of the worst ratios in terms of prep time to instructional time in the world, and every teacher feels it, right? Like we get into this profession because we want to do right by kids and do our best. And then you get into a system where you just don't have time to do what you know you need to do or what you want to do. And it's, I don't know, it's demoralizing. It's hard to, eventually you have to let some things go. And I think my issue as a younger teacher, I let my pieces of my life go because I was so focused on, I know this is the teacher that I want to be, and it wasn't sustainable. And, you know, I think a lot of people hit a point where you just have to say, I'm going to do the best I can, but I got to be a person too. And so much of that just comes down to time and being able to have enough time during our day to do what we need to do right by kids, and then go home and have time to be the person, the parent, the child, whatever you need to be when you go home. So, I mean, that's, I would almost use my last two wishes on that, but that's cheating. So I'm not going to do that. But wish number two is definitely more time for teachers.
I feel though it's huge, right? And as someone who, as a coach, right, I'm someone who offers professional development. It's my whole career. It's so hard when you're like, oh my gosh, I'm just adding to your plates right now. Do you know what I mean? That are already so full. And I know it, and that's the system I'm in, and I seem to be yoked to it in some ways, right? Where I show up and I'm here for a topic and I'm here to do the work on it, and that's fine. And I love my work and I think it's helpful. But boy, that idea of I've just given you a list of to-dos that you now have to do in your own time is a real problem, especially when the teachers aren't the ones who are asking for the PD, right? And I'm sure you do that as well, right? Where you're like, oh, you don't even want this. And then things don't happen, right? I've seen you tweet about this quite a bit, of that idea of like, so it could be the best PD in the world. And of course, obviously all of mine is, but if I don't have the time to make it actually work, right? To do the planning, to find the text, to do all that stuff, it's never going to happen. That's a great wish.
Yeah.
That's a great wish. All right. Number 3, right. You're on.
Wish number 3. Okay. This is going to seem like a small wish, but as someone, so my wife teaches elementary, and she actually has a mixed grade, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade classroom. And so many times I've come up with like these great ideas. Like I'll come to her and be like, oh my gosh, I figured out a way to plan my unit so that I can have like small group instructional time built into my day. And I'll bring it to her and she's just like, you don't do that? Like that's not already happening. So I think my wish, I wish more secondary teachers could go watch elementary classrooms. Like I know it's a different world, but there is something that happens in elementary classrooms that is magical. Like the way teachers think about student needs and responding to those needs, and the emphasis on like social emotional learning and what that really looks like. I love, part of my job now, I get the opportunity to visit elementary classrooms, and we actually have an all kindergarten school in Sunnyside, and visiting that school and those classrooms is just amazing to see. I mean, you've got kids coming in there that have never seen any books before. You've got kids that are like almost reading at that point, and it's not an issue. Like, I mean, I shouldn't say that. It is a lot of work having watched those, but they pull it off. And I think secondary teachers, that's mind blowing to me sometimes. Like, so that's my wish. I wish more secondary teachers had the time. We need time, and the ability to just go watch elementary classrooms and just pull ideas and glean from what happens there. Cause it's magical. I don't know another way to say it. It's really cool.
They're wizards in K2.
Yes.
I'm convinced. You know what I mean? And having seen it with my own children, I'm like, you aren't human. Like you taught my child to read right. Like, what? In the pandemic? I mean, they were masked. And I can't even. I can't conceive of it. I love that. I mean, I think inner visitation in general is so big. Like being able to just see other people teach. It's the blessing of my career. It's still the thing I enjoy the most. Is just being able to see teaching, and to generally it's great teaching, even if it's not my style, even if you do things a little differently than I do. Do you know what I mean? It's like I just really respect the work. Being able to see people like figure stuff out is so great. And especially, across. Because I would say inverse too. I would love elementary school teachers to see middle high school classrooms. because sometimes what I find is like we have typically, because I tend to be middle high school oriented, we have
Mm-hmm.
like more. I do think sometimes I have more of an urgency of like, okay, let's
Yeah.
get more complex. Let's get more complex text. Let's get more complex thinking. Let's push you a little bit more. And sometimes my elementary school colleagues are a little more like wonderfully nurturing and you're doing great just the way you are and
Yeah.
giving them and honestly teaching them, right? But it'd be neat to do some
Mm-hmm.
cross pollination. I love that.
Yeah.
You did good for on the fly. I'm impressed.
Oh, thanks. That's why I said if I just make myself go with my gut and what really I'm thinking about right now, that's how you know I really mean it.
That's right. That's right. All right. Last question is favorite and least favorite word in education.
I think favorite is, and I'm going to have to explain it, is
Mm-hmm.
the word evidence. And
We are going to have to
I'm gonna,
explain that.
yeah, I'm gonna approach that from when I think about assessment practices in my classroom.
Yeah.
The phrase that made a huge switch for me mentally, and it sounds really small, but was to start saying I'm looking for evidence of learning, because it opened a bunch of doors for me. I think before, when I was just, I'm assessing students. When that was my focus, I was focusing on the assessments I was creating and sort of creating this narrow lens of where I'm going to see that learning or how I might see that learning. But when I started saying I'm looking for evidence, that opened up so many possibilities. I'm a huge proponent of oral assessment, and I never really thought about it until I realized, like, man, sitting down and talking with a student about their learning gets me so much evidence of what's going on in their head right now, more so than 10 questions on a piece of paper that, I have to make some inferences. Did they really know what they were doing? Did they not? I can sit down and talk. That was a game changer. So I know could go a million different ways in education right now, but when I say evidence, that's the one that I'm thinking of.
That's beautiful. I had a mentor, Kathleen Tolan, who's actually passed, but she
Hmm.
used to come into as a consultant, as a PD person. She would follow us and give us critique and talk to us. And one of the things she said all the time
Hmm.
to us is she would like watch us coach and watch us do this job, and she like pick your head up, look around, what's happening, what are the kids doing, what's going on. Do you know what I mean? And all of a sudden you'd look up and you'd be like,
Uh-huh.
oh, no one's doing any work. Like no one's doing anything. You know what I mean? Like I'm so focused on my lesson and coaching the teacher and all these things. And like you look around and the evidence, the actual evidence of what kids are learning, what they're doing, shows a very different picture than the lesson plan and the curricular documents and the assessments and all that stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love that. And the idea of like oral assessment, I know that running records are very out of favor now, and for some good reasons. And the pendulum switch. But man, you sit down, and I do this in high schools all the time. You sit down with a kid, and like have them just read a little bit aloud to you,
Mm-hmm.
and then like ask them what they read, ask them to make a couple inferences about what they read, and you get
Mm-hmm.
so much about what's blocking them from being able to access the books that you're asking them to read. It's a powerful, powerful tool. I love that. All right,
Yeah.
you convinced me.
Good, good. Okay. Oh,
All right,
least favorite.
favorite. We're ending really negative. We're gonna go really dark.
Yeah, wait, yeah. I'm good with it. I have two, and I'm gonna go with, actually this is my runner up, which would be ironic with my favorite word. I almost went with data, just because
Mhm.
I think it is a wildly misused word sometimes to support decisions that have already been made. I'm not gonna go with that one though. I'm gonna go with grit.
Uh,
Um, Not because I don't love the concept of kids learning how to push through, but I think the way education has sort of twisted it is
yeah.
to put the onus of change on a student. Oftentimes, and this goes back to kind of that averaging grades or things like that. It's a message told to the student of, regardless of whether or not it's an unfair system, just keep trying. And it shifts the lens away from me as my practice of like, well, why did I create a barrier? And instead just says, just keep pushing against the barrier no matter what it is. And I want students to develop that grit and resilience, but it doesn't happen if there's never a success or never a positive experience that convinces them that putting in that work is worth it long term. So I think that's the word that, I don't know, it might be my least favorite, but it definitely raises the most red flags when I hear it, just because I need to know more. Like, how are we using that word? Why are we using it? Are we blaming kids for systemic issues by using that word?
Yeah. And also, like, are we valuing one habit of mind over all the others? Right. Because, like, grit is
Mm-hmm.
one thing, but there are people for a variety of reasons just aren't very gritty people.
Mm-hmm.
And you know
Mm-hmm.
what? They're okay too. There's lots of ways to live. Do you know what I mean? There's lots of ways to be successful. There's lots of ways to find peace and happiness and centering yourself and community and grit. I don't know that I would put that at number one.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's,
Yeah.
you're
I
right.
think
And in
it's,
fact, the
I,
ways that I'm gritty, the ways that I have grit, sometimes have been a real uh, barrier to me uh, getting what I need from life. I find it very much a sort of, not to get too whatever, but a very much a white perspective, right? You got to be
mm-hmm.
gritty,
Mm-hmm.
self-reliant, do it on your own. And I inhabit a lot of those ideas, and it isolates you in some ways more than expands your horizons. Sometimes. Again, I want
Yeah.
kids to be resilient. I do. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I also think, I mean, as someone who has, we're getting deep. I love it. As someone who has struggled with the need to constantly be successful or achieve, like, I think I was taught that message of grit a lot growing up, and I think there were some harmful elements of it. Like, I have had to renegotiate my relationship with rest as a result of it, and taking care of myself. And so I think I think multiple perspectives of, we just use this word thinking, it's a soundbite of, this is a great thing to tell kids, have grit, be, and it's like, I think we need to question a lot of things about it.
I agree. I agree. And again, that's no knock on the original, as you said, right? The original ideas, the research that came out of it, so interesting and useful information, right? But
Mm-hmm.
like everything else in probably every field, certainly education. I had a mentor of mine tell me once, like, as I published my first book, he's like, just be ready because it's about to be used in the worst possible way. Right? And like, of course,
uh,
because people are just grabbing things and using them, right? And I think that that's a
yeah.
good example, is that, boy, that
Yeah.
research was wonderful and it got used in some really weird ways.
I even think Dweck has sadly had to come out and like try to make statements of like, hey,
Oh,
nope, please don't. Please do this differently.
stop being mean to children. Stop being mean. That's not what I said. Well, may no one use our work in ways we didn't intend, Tyler.
Hopefully so.
Thank you for coming on and talking with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much it was a joy to get to meet you and just talk.
Same.